Första ämnet för dagen då, slutförvar av använt kärnbränsle. En fråga som har stötts och blötts i flera decennier och många länder har inte sällan skjutit frågan framför sig. Vi har 3 stycken representanter från 3 olika länder, från deras strålsäkerhetsmyndigheter. Och först så välkomnar vi upp Ansi Gerhardsson som är chef för slutförvarsenheten på Strålsäkerhetsmyndigheten. Och just den här sessionen kommer att hållas på engelska. Och rubriken är The Differences and Similarities in the Scientific Review of Final Repositories in Switzerland, Finland and Sweden. Varsågod.
Good morning, everybody. This is what you will get for the next session. My name is Ansi Gerhardsson. I've been in this business for more than 15 years. I've been at the SSM for almost 7 years now and leading the group that's been reviewing the applications for a spent nuclear fuel disposal or repository. I will give you a short overview of what's been done so far. So let's start up with where we are today. This is something that's been going on for more than 40 years. It's been a long process. We did get the applications for a repository and an encapsulation plant in 2011. And it's been a parallel review process done by the authority and the Land Environmental Court. Both of us handed in our statements to the government this January, saying the authority said this is something that could be okay to grant a license, while the environmental court said this could be okay, but we suggest that the government ask for more information from the implementer. So right now the decision lies with the government, and the government has asked for more information from the SKB, this company that's been doing all this for the industry. As a lot of you may know, the suggested method is a method of encapsulating the spent fuel within copper canisters. And these canisters are supposed to be put down in the Swedish bedrock some 500 meters down, surrounded by a swelling clay that's supposed to keep things dry. The industry wants to put this encapsulation plant in Oskarshamn, close to the interim storage for the spent fuel, and they want to build a repository at Forsmark. You can see it on the map. I said it was a long process. Focus for this session today is research within this area. And the industry, of course, has been doing a lot of research to come up with this suggested method. They've had the obligation, according to the Act on Nuclear Activities, to come up with RD&D programs every 3rd year, and been doing that since the mid-80s. And as you can see, 2016 was the last one we get, and we are expecting another one next year that we will be reviewing as the regulator. On the other hand, the regulator had to build up its own competence in this area. We don't have in Sweden a TSO, a technical support organization. I know they have in Finland, but we don't have it in Sweden. So we've had to build up a knowledge, competence of our own. In the late 80s, they decided to build up this competence and really put in a lot of resources into this. And since early 90s, the authority and the two the old authorities, the Nuclear Inspectorate and the former Radiation Protection Authority, started a lot of own research programs in the early 90s and been continuing doing all this research over the years. Technical aspects and safety assessments methodology, a lot of focus has been on natural science and technology, geology, hydrogeology, chemistry, of course. But that's not all. Since this is a question that influenced a lot of people, you know, even though there's a focus on natural science, there's also been a research program in stakeholder dialogue, together with environmental organizations, the municipalities, and other stakeholders, to make sure that we keep up a good dialogue in this area. We've had a good financing situation in Sweden. We've been able to draw money from a nuclear waste fund, a fund that the industry puts money into to make sure that we have all the money that we need to take care of all this business. But we've also been able to take money from that fund to finance research. And we looked back a bit and realized that just during the last 18 years, somewhat 25 million euros been spent in Sweden on the regulator side. The industry has put in a lot more on their side, but on the regulator side, we've been doing a lot of research. We've had a lot of challenges. It's not been easy. Sometimes we hear that, oh, you got the applications in 2011 and you've been preparing and preparing. Why did it take so long? But you have to remember that SSM is a small organization if you compare worldwide. And Sweden is a small country. And being a small country, we do compete with the industry about the researchers. And we've had to struggle somewhat to maintain a strategy and not just to rely too much on over-engaged reviewers. Sometimes you can have a reviewer, some of your staff members, that's so interested in the subject that they can drag the research forward, but you need to be a little bit more strategic to make sure that you cover all the interested areas. It's not always easy to evaluate and interpret results that you get from research. You ask a question, you get a result, and how should you interpret it? And sometimes, if you get results from several or more than one area, or researchers, they might come up with different results. How do we keep a good way forward, and how do we come to a conclusion even though that there's different views on this, maybe a certain question? It's been a challenge to keep up the openness and transparency. That's one of our key words for, our value words for the authority, it's openness. It's sometimes not always that easy to keep up and present everything that you do. And it's also been a challenge to just follow this process and do research, basic research, to go into sharp review process. So where do we go now? You can say we've had the applications, we've done our review when it comes to the spent nuclear fuel, so we can sit back and relax. Well, there's really more research needed. We're not done yet. We're still awaiting the government's decision when it comes to the spent fuel repository. There's coming reviews. We are also reviewing the extension, the application for extension of an existing repository in Sweden for other waste. There are more repositories coming, not for spent fuel, but for other wastes. And there's coming safety analysis that need to be reported. So we need to keep up with the research and continue. So we have to go forward. And now it's time for our Finnish colleague.
Thank you very much, Ansi. I can say that after these three speakers, we will have a discussion, and then you will also be able to ask questions. So, very welcome, Director Jussi Heinonen from Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority in Finland, STUK.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Really nice to be here to celebrate the SSM's 10 years journey, and also to be discussing on disposal and where we are in Finland and Sweden and also in Switzerland, which is interesting to hear. So my name is Jussi Heinonen. I'm the director in STUK, which is similar regulator as SSM, but in Finland. My department is responsible to have oversight on nuclear waste management, disposal, and safeguards issues in Finland. So the quite short overview of the Finnish system. The situation is such, in short, that the government has granted Posiva, which is a sister company to SKP, a construction license for the disposal facility in about 3 years ago. The decision was supported by STUK's safety evaluation and our safety assessment that we submitted to the Ministry of Employment and Economy in February 2015. Our main conclusion was that the encapsulation plant and the disposal facility can be built to be safe. At that time, well, the decision is about construction. There is still going to be the operating license phase, so there is kind of next decision to become, and that construction license phase, we evaluated that the safety argumentation, the overall safety, what they have shown us is convincing enough, but we also highlighted that there are several areas that Posiva needs to develop further, address more in detail before they can really start the disposal activities to move on to actual operational phase. And also we set quite many hold points to the construction phase that before they can move beyond to a certain step, they need to provide us further information. So from the regulator point of view, it was in a way kind of conditional approval that to start the construction, that's okay, but before you start the actual disposal activities, we need to get a little bit more information related to uncertainties that were identified during the review. To come to this step, similarly as Ansi showed, it has been a long journey. I think Sweden started a little bit earlier, then Finland was copying the system in the early 80s, and then after that, Posiva and SKP has been developing the concept together. But it has been quite a long journey in both sides. Posiva has been gone through the site selection, construction of the Onkalo underground rock characterization facility, and now they are moving more to be prepared for the disposal operation, kind of industrialization, development of the actual machines that you need for the installation, and of course the construction of the encapsulation and disposal facility. On regulatory side, we have been following quite closely what Posiva has been doing. We had to develop our regulations, kind of keep up to the progress in the project, and like Ansi said, we also had a big challenge in developing our competencies. We have something that could be called in Finland as TSO, but more closely I think we are in the same situation as SSM, that we use several support consultants, several support organizations that can provide some information to us. So what have been the steps? Just what I would like to highlight here, compared to Sweden, most of the things we do in Finland and Sweden, like the concept, it's the same. Our culture, our nations are quite the same, but there are some differences. One difference is the licensing system. Compared to Sweden, we have a kind of three-step licensing system that the government is always involved. It starts with the decision principle, and that's a kind of political decision in Finland that in year 2000, the government and the parliament made the decision that the site for the disposal would be Olkiluoto site, and then the concept would be KPS3 concept. So at that point, the site and concept was selected, and then Posiva and regulators STUK moved on that basis. Then in 2012, Posiva submitted the construction license application, and that was a government decision. And again, when Posiva will apply for the operational license application, that will go to the government. So government is involved in our situation more often in the licensing decisions. On the main phases, we have kind of looking back, we have made some conclusions, something that we learned during the different phases, and this comes a little bit on the aspect of scientific basis, scientific understanding, and what's really important for safety. Looking back to the 80s and 90s, the discussion was at that time started on that we really need to find the best geological site that there is, and we need to select that site for the disposal facility. However, in the end of that period, it was found out that really there is quite many geologically adequate, suitable sites, but for example, the societal factor comes to be more important, that if you have several sites, then the local acceptance comes to be more important in the actual selection of the site, and also other aspects that affect in the company side to the site selection. That was kind of conclusion at that time that, well, we need to find a site that is geologically adequate, fulfills the safety criteria, and there is also other factors that are affecting to the selection. After the decision principle, we started to do quite a lot of also in STUK side review of Posiva's documentation when they were preparing for the construction license application, and they submitted a kind of draft documentations to STUK. And we started to do quite detailed review of the different aspects, and then we ended up in quite many scientific debates on many of the things, which were quite difficult at that time and didn't come to any conclusion quite often. So then we started to talk that, is this really the way that we will go with the review, or is this really the thing that will end up in STUK being able to say that this is a safe, or make the evaluation about the safety. So we kind of changed it the bottom up, that, or kind of turned it the way around, that we started to think about what's really safety significant and how the different scientific and technical aspects are related to the safety significance. Kind of started to think about top-down review and tried to change our research, our expert people attitudes about how to do the review, what's really significant in that. So kind of the conclusion, or what we learned about that we don't need to, or we are not able to solve all the scientific debates, but we need to really be assured about the safety. Safety is the key thing. So what's the next thing that we are going to be learning? It could be something that how to really move from the research and development to an industrial process, because looking back, it has been quite a lot about research development, stepwise development of the concept, but when Posiva is moving to the real disposal phase, it has to be really industrial process. So that's what they are working now, and that's what we are also regulating now and following now. As a conclusion, kind of I wanted to give you this kind of diagram, that the way we are trying to make our review, that we always think about the safety objectives. Everything has to be based on the sound scientific basis and sound technology, But then we, as a regulator, we need to be thinking about the safety and safety objective. And it might be that in some cases there are scientific debates, scientific argument, or kind of quarrels that they are not agreeing. And it might be that that will end up in a situation that there needs to be some, for example, design modification, because there is no possibility to find scientific agreement on some aspects, how that can be treated. So it might end up that we need to find, or the POSIFA needs to find another solution, another way around that they can show that in the end it's safe, even taking into account the scientific disagreement, the uncertainties that there is. Just some examples, what we are kind of discussing now, for example, in STUK, is the uncertainty management. I think the key thing overall in the disposal is the uncertainties. Uncertainties related to the long time scales that we are addressing here. How to make the kind of comprehensive evaluation of what happens in future, how systematic you can do it, how to take into account the different uncertainties that you have looking in future 10,000 or 100,000 or million years, and what of those uncertainties have safety significance. Of course, one aspect in Finland, which is important in our case now, because the construction is going on, is the evaluation of the construction effect, how the construction affects the site properties, how much kind of change in the bedrock properties can be allowed, and how to control that. So that comes because we are in the construction phase. And one more related to performance and kind of a little bit more technical aspect is the disposal system early state development. So what happens with the bentonite buffer, for example, what happens to the host rock in the early phase when you close and when the water starts to come to the system. So that's something that we have felt that there is still some more work that POSIFA needs to be doing, evaluating that and kind of having research on that and development related to those, that especially on that phase, because well, the first thousands of years are really important in the disposal. We need to evaluate for really long periods, but the first 100 years, thousands of years, those are the kind of that make the really importance in the disposal safety. What else? I was looking at Ansi's presentation, but maybe on research, on just one thing, because that's the kind of the topic of today. In STUK, we don't do that much research. So on that also, we have a little bit different system in Finland. So we have a national waste management research program that's funded through the Waste Management Fund. And then as a regulator, we are involved in steering of the research that's done nationally. POSIFA has its own program, and then we have the national waste management program. But we don't have own money to do real research. We are doing safety review as a regulator, but then we are steering the research in Finland and kind of assuring that way that there is the competencies building up in Finland that we might need. Thank you.
Thank you, Jussi. In Sweden, there's been a debate about how well the copper canisters can stand the environment in the disposal. Have you had the same experience in Finland?
Of course, we have been following that quite closely. When it started, we also started some similar research activities that I think has been done in Sweden, that to kind of do the same study, do the same research in the Finnish university and then also abroad. So we have been following, and then I know SKP and POSIFA has been cooperating a lot of that. So from the regulatory point of view, yes, we have been following it closely and also required POSIFA to do more work. But from kind of public side or from the media, it didn't raise that to be that big issue. So some newspaper picked it up, but it didn't come to a public discussion that strongly that I believe that it has come in here.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we welcome Director Felix Altorfer at Swish. nuclear, the Swiss Federal Nuclear Safety Inspectorate, ENSI, in Switzerland.
Yes, thanks for having me. For me, a great opportunity to talk about the Swiss case, disposal of spent fuel. In Switzerland, it's required that the spent fuel is deposited in a repository, geological repository, but as well the low and intermediate level waste. But I'm just talking now about the Swiss case on spent fuel. I saw Jussi's presentation and said, so I didn't want to copy that what you said, but we're thinking on similar lines. But I wanted to show you, we are in the site selection process now. That started in 2008, because in the 80s, Switzerland was following the Swedish example, building a repository in crystalline bedrock, and the investigations turned out that there are some bedrock in Switzerland that has needed properties for repository, but the area are not big enough. And so government, actually ENSI, came to the conclusion in Switzerland you should go and have a look at sediments, clay-rich sediments, and that's what the implementer Nagara in our case did. And I want to present to you the basic idea behind it. We have a safety-first approach in the siting process, so we look at all of Switzerland. Then we predefine safety criteria for the siting process, and then we have 3 stages to find the site. The basic idea was that the geological information existing at the start of this process is enough to do that. Switzerland is a small country, there's a lot of geological experience in the country, and so it was possible to reduce from the whole of Switzerland into certain areas. Now, if you know something about the geology of Switzerland, you will notice you have a big amount are simply the Alps, and we got also a second mountain range, the Jura mountain range here. So for the high-level waste, you could build for the low-level waste anywhere in Switzerland a repository, but for the high-level waste, you're actually limited to the lowlands, where all the people live, and where it's rather close to the German or the Austrian border. So you will run definitely into a stakeholder problem. So if you do that and you have a look at the favorite site and you narrow it down to sites where you can actually have this repository, high-level waste, HAA in German. So you're here in these areas. And what you notice here, this is the Swiss-German border. And that means if you're going to build a repository here, or even here, because we're talking that this is 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers, that means you will have to include other stakeholders. You have to do that on the local level with the organizations down here, but also with the Land, Baden-Württemberg in the case, and also with Berlin. Yeah, so you have a constant exchange, and of course the scientific case for your project has to be sound. In order to explain that, first of all, the siting itself needs sound geological information that you can show to your German neighbors, and of course also to the Swiss regions here, that there is a scientific reason why you go there. The other thing you see here is this, well, Ansi talked about a small country. It's even possible to have smaller countries than Sweden. And so the whole thing is just 300 kilometers wide and say 100 to 200 kilometers north-south. And if you have a look at the areas, I mean, Sweden is 10 times as large as Switzerland. And it shows up in the persons per square kilometers, the factor of 10 higher. So I told you, due to the geology, the mountainous regions, you can forget about the high-level waste repository here, and also here is also mountains, so you're restricted to that area. And you got 1 million people around Zurich, and you got 200,000 people, that's the next big city, Winterthur, and you got all the repositories here. So you're forced to explain that, what the scientific case is. You will have strong stakeholder involvement to do that. And that's what we did. Let me go back to that. Well, we started this process in 2008, and in each of the regions there were created regional councils that have a look at the siting of the encapsulation plants, for example, land use, what's the best land use. We wanted to have local knowledge to do that, and also they have groups on safety where they discuss with NAGRA, the implementer, and ENSI, the regulator. Now, if you look at our technical specific problem, so we chose to have, as a host rock formation, a clay-rich formation, Opolinus clay called in Switzerland. The main reason why we choose that, it has excellent capability for retention of radionuclides. If you have uranium and you set that free in a clay formation and you wait for 1 million years, it will be transported by just a few centimeters. Because most of the radionuclides simply got stuck to the clay surface and stay there. So the transport is only by the diffusion. There's no water flow through a clay-rich layer, and so you have only movement in the pore space in the clay, and it goes very, very slowly so that radionuclides leak out of this formation. If fractures show up, say earthquakes and so on, what then happens if you have a fracture in a clay system? It has a swelling property, so that means if water comes into clay, the clay itself will swell up and close that. So there's, again, it protects itself, there's no water flow through the formation, and the radionuclides remain in the nucleation. So that's the pros, but it also has several points where scientific research is needed. Because it's such a dense material, it has also very low permeability for gas transport. And that means if you have steel containers or any steel metals in the waste, that corrodes slowly over the thousands of years, you will produce gas inside the repository, and that gas has to move out of the formation. And if there's a pressure buildup, it could lead to crack building inside the host rock formation into the clay. Despite the self-sealing, that could pose a problem. Another thing is that if you use concrete to build the construction ability, if you build this repository in a clay formation, you can't build it like you do it here in crystalline bedrock in Scandinavia. So you need some concrete actually to stabilize it. And the interface between clay and concrete, you will create slowly chemical reactions that could clog up the pores between the concrete and the clay formation. And if you clog up all the pores around your construction of the repository, that could also create a problem for the gas transport. So you have several issues where research is needed. Gas transport construction feasibility, is it better to build shafts, vertical shafts or ramps? And also a problem we have, you have it too as well, is the glaciation. This is the last glaciation in Switzerland 20,000 years ago. And if we go back here, so we got in this region, so up here in the north, we got these three sites, here Weinland, Lägern and Bötzberg. And they're pretty close. I mean, Weinland is completely covered, Lägern partly, and only the Bötzberg here would be free. And since we have sediments in Switzerland, all the lakes we have in Switzerland are produced by the glaciers. And that means it could be a possibility that glaciation leads to a deep erosion in those areas where the repository is. And that means that the protection of the repository over 100,000, 1 million years couldn't be that good as it is now. So we have to think about how erosion impacts the geology in that field. Now we have a similar system as in Sweden. Every 5 years, NAGRA has to submit a technical report on research, development and demonstration. That is in English. And we review that. We don't steer that in a sense directly, but they have to submit that. We have also a disposal plan that has to submit it every 5 years to government, and that's part of it. So we can comment on that and say, okay, then that's well what you did, but the next 5 or 10 years you should do this. And that just gives you a list. Since we are in the last stage, we expect government actually to make a decision on the narrowing down. We came from 6 regions now to 3. Government should approve that, we hope, by the end of the year. And then we go into the last stage of the siting process, so that will be additional investigations, geosphere characterization, long-term evolution of the sites. That includes also erosion due to glaciations. The geomechanical conditions, that's for the construction feasibility, gas transport. Then also, if we have spent fuel and cladding in dry intermediate storage, as we have in Switzerland, we need some additional research if you're going to open up those casks, say, in the 50s and 60s. It is planned to operate the repository for spent fuels in the 60s and 70s. So is it still possible to handle that after all these years? Then also optimization, the spent fuel loading in the disposal canisters. If you do that in the clay system, it produces heat that could damage the bentonite. If you spread out or if you reduce the loading of a canister, you actually can protect the bentonite. That is a function of how much room you have down there. So there's an optimization process that they are going to investigate. We have a pilot facility in the Swiss law. That means a small part of the repository will be separate, has a separate access to it, and it's instrumented so you can monitor the development of the repositories. Both of them, also low-level and the high-level waste, and they have to think about that, what kind of waste goes in there, how are they going to build it, how are they going to instrument that. They have also to show that they can retrieve the spent fuel. They have finally, when they build the repository, you have to go down then with all the machinery and have to show that they're able to retrieve high-level waste. Yeah, and right, and the tunnel construction concept, the technology, how you're going to build the emplacement drifts. So that's all in there, we review that, and that's an ongoing process that will take us long into the 40s and 50s when they are actually going to build the repository. And these things are also important. Maybe here in Scandinavia you have fewer neighbors, but we have a lot of them. And so siting regions close to the Swiss-German border will be an issue. You have to constant exchange with the stakeholder. Also, the transport of radioactive waste to siting region is an issue. The encapsulation plant that goes with it, where should that encapsulation plant be for the packing and welding of the disposal? Should it be at the central storage site we have now? Should it be at the site where the repository is? These are also technical questions, but that has to be solved with the stakeholders. And we are going for a decision in principles roughly 2030, and there will be a nationwide referendum. And that was actually followed up. It used to be that in Switzerland we have 3 levels of government, the federal government, the cantonal level, and the communities. And cantons used to have a right of veto. They could veto a site for a repository. And they did that once in the late 90s. And after that, the federal government changed the law and said repositories are in Switzerland a national infrastructure, like a motorway or a big railway tunnel. And that's why it's covered by federal law. There will be no local vetoes anymore, but there will be a referendum. It is a possibility, a nationwide referendum on the decision in principle. So government has to approve it, both chambers of parliament have to approve that, and finally there's a possibility that the nation as a whole can actually have a say on whether there will be whether these sites for repositories are acceptable. And with that, I would like to close. Just where you find additional information, if you want to brush up your German, you come, and we also have information in French, Italian, and English. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix. And then I want Ansi and Felix and Jussi to come up here on the stage again. Thanks. Well, it's quite obvious that you have reached a different stage in your reviews. If you have started the review today, had you done it in a different way? Ansi?
Good question. said I've been in this business for quite some time, but I wasn't present at the start in the 70s and the 80s, so I don't really know how the discussion went at that time. If we started off today with the knowledge we have today, yeah, probably we would have done it in a different way.
In what way?
Also a good question. Maybe a little bit more strategic with the knowledge, you know. It's, if you have more knowledge, you tend to maybe look another way than you do without the knowledge. No, that wasn't a really good answer, but I think that's the best I can do right now.
But do you mean to communicate it in another way, or to use other kind of research, or so what?
You learn all the time, you know, you try to do the best you can, and you realize that there's always someone that misunderstands what you say or don't understand on purpose or not purpose. Working more on being clear in what we want to do. You know, we have had help from communication strategics trying to help us communicate what we were trying to say. And it was really interesting to have that discussion with them, because it's so difficult to try to communicate these really scientific, you know, hard scientific issues to those who's not that involved in scientific issues, and try to interpret them into something more daily work, daily words. So I think that's something we would have worked more with, explaining all the ways. I said something about openness and transparency, to be better in describing the way that we, from all the research and all the scientific issues, describe how we come up to our conclusion. I think that's a challenge that we would have addressed in another way.
Okay, so that's a challenge in itself.
Yes.
And Jussi, what do you say? Would you have done it in another way if you had started today?
I'm quite happy on the actual review, how we managed to do it in STUK. Of course, there is many smaller things that we could do better or could have done differently. But I think what we could have done really better is the preparation. We did it okay, but for example, what Ansi raised in her presentation, the competence development, I think we started that too late to kind of build up the competencies in the regulator and build up the resources. We managed to do the review, but it would be more easy or more kind of relaxed if we would have started kind of hiring people and really starting to train them to be regulators and expert in safety review a little bit earlier. We were expecting to have the construction license application in the end of 2012. We really started to build up the competencies and recruit people in 2006. So that was kind of busy time, and then getting more people and then getting them trained and also reviewing possible draft documentation. So that would be something that I would start earlier than to be better prepared for the actual review.
Okay. And Felix, what's your view?
Well, we were always proud to be really a technical organization. So the scientific base was all up front. We have also in Switzerland the tradition to work very closely with the universities. And that's something I really found enhances the level of the quality of your review. You need to say, you have centers. For example, in Switzerland, we love to build railway tunnels. We got the Alps, and we do one after another. So there's a big experience how to build that. And there's universities who have experts, that just to give you an example. And you, of course, instead of building up competence, which you should do to a certain point, you actually have, over the years, a close collaboration with these guys. Because they're up front at the state of the art, and they actually challenge you and your views, or if you want to explain what the core of the problem actually is, the exchange with outside, also from the universities, helps. The universities have the tendency to have a look at all the details, and then it's your turn to cut that off if you have the main information. But I think that's important. The other thing we have, that in our case, post-Fukushima, we had the national evening news parked on our parking lot because they wanted to know everything. We had our communication was at that time, the department, very small. And so in order to transfer the information you have from the scientific, what have you actually know about the system, to give that to the stakeholder, it's an important part that you produce it on your website and you can look, we have looked at it, and you can look up here and there. So it's a combination of that. You need a lot of technical expertise inside, in-house, to ask the correct questions, but you also need communication so that stakeholders know about that. Otherwise, it's also useless because, well, at least in Switzerland, I don't know the other countries, but it's an eminently political process. You have to take all the stakeholders with you to actually realize a repository.
Yeah. Would you say that you have looked at the Swedish and Finnish examples to get some help from there?
I think, maybe you should comment as well, I think, what have you done, should you have done better in the past? I think one observes what the international community does and learns from each other and discusses things. I think that's really a key issue. It's not a nation-only approach you have, and you learn from each other. And I also have to comment that, of course, you would do things now better. I told also to my team, hey, we should have had this idea a year or 18 months ago. It's so obvious, but it's not that obvious if you start the process. And I think you should not be too hard on yourself, even as a regulator, that this isn't, you have to accept that it's a process and you learn, because the implemented Posiva Nagar learns as well. So I think that's not a negative. I think you need an organization that is willing to learn, say, yeah, we should have done this better, but has it stopped the process or no, it doesn't. Okay, so it's not that bad. So I think the will to improve and also the drive to improve is necessary.
So the opposite way then, is it something you are especially satisfied with in your reviews?
I can continue with what you say, Felix, there with the international collaboration. Even though Sweden was one of the first in the process of trying to come up with a solution, and Finland was right in the back of us, the collaboration we've had internationally within different organizations within the EU or the IAEA or the OECD, but also with our fellow countries, fellow regulators doing the same thing, has been really a key issue to be able to build up the competence and really go into this. We've been able to ask our Finnish friends about certain questions. Well, what do you think about this? How did you solve this? Or did you solve it? That's something that's really a key issue to success, to be able to go forward. If you used to say alone is not strong, you have to be more to be able to drag from the other ones and their competence and their knowledge and their experiences. So I think that's really a good thing, taking part in the international discussion and collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add something? Yes,
sorry, what was it?
Is it something you are especially satisfied with in your reviews?
Well,
that you've done correctly.
Well, from the regulator, I'm satisfied that we were able to put together the safety evaluation and kind of in that to have the, well, certainly also in STUK we had the different kind of views and the experts, outside experts that we were using. Not all were kind of, well, this goes this way. Well, there were different views on different topics. So I'm happy that we were able to go through discussions and through the different discussing about the different arguments for safety to come up with a conclusion that we felt confident to say that, well, for construction license step, this is okay, we can support the construction license to be granted. And I think that was really, well, I'm really satisfied that we were able to do it, and we learned a lot during that time in STUK about, through all the discussion, better understanding about the whole safety and whole disposal system and how everything affects. So that was really what I'm really happy about.
Yeah. And Felix?
Well, again, the point of learning, we had in discussion in the stage of our site selection plan where rock mechanical questions showed up. So you drill a borehole, you extract some cores, and you make some measurements on them, just for the rock mechanics. And suddenly in the discussion, different experts said, well, this is not the state of the art, how these cores actually were taken or used in the experiment. These days you would do it differently. So things you learn from that, is it really correct? And what we did now is simply get all the experts together on one table and say, now let's draw up a protocol. How cores have to be extracted from the borehole, how they have to be treated, stored, and the experiments. And we go to 2 different or several labs to do these geomechanical measurements. So that's, you bring all these people that actually have a say in this at the table, you define a process, and then you do the research properly according to protocol, because that makes the review process much simpler, because you know that the state of the art technology has been made, and now you focus the discussion on the results and the safety relevance of these results. And so sometimes, again, is this something you're not so proud of? Yes, in the last stage I was not so proud of, but now I'm proud of, because, okay, this is how we change the system and bring these relevant people at the table and check whether it's even safety relevant. It could well be that the geomechanical questions in the last stage maybe is not the most important one. However, you solved a question in that sense that the process has become much clearer, how to discuss it. And I think that's, for me, that's also the regulator. You have to look, I think you have to be a little bit perceptive at who could criticize you. Said, who are these people that are going to criticize you? What are their views and opinions? So bring them at the table. Said, why do you talk that when you're going to proceed? Because it makes your life 5 years down the road much easier. So we're trying to do that in areas where we could see it. Sometimes you don't see it, where the controversy shows up. But in the areas where you can see it, I think it's quite reasonable to do that, to try to see where actually are the points and why is this relevant, to find that out beforehand.
Would you say that is it a political debate in Switzerland about this?
No, well, another thing, since we have this site selection process, I think it's also most important in the country to have the roles clear to the public. These are the implementers, that's the regulator, and that's the ministry who leads the process. So when I'm talking to stakeholders, they say, oh, the system doesn't work properly. Okay, look, you don't have to ask me. I'm the regulator. Ask the ministry. And they are competent, say, look, we do this because of that and that. So that the general public knows there is somebody independent who leads the process, somebody who independently develops the project, and another independent, the regulator, does that. That is most important, to see that roles. And that helps, of course. You know, so it's not the political, I think the political system is clear, the rules are set, but people have to realize who are these guys and what are they doing? I think that's a really important step to actually explain that. It's trust building. We have this technical forum on safety where all the stakeholders sit in one room. So the universities are there, the regions are there, cantons are there, Germany is there, and you can simply bring in technical questions. Somebody discusses that, it will be put up on the web. And the good thing is that all the stakeholders hear the same answer, and all the stakeholders got sooner or later to realize what's the responsibility of each of the players. And that helps. That simply helps to clarify that. And it's trust building. The best moment for me is when if a guy from a nuclear critical NGO comes to me and asks me, I'm not clear about this issue, what is the issue, and I can answer that. And he builds up then he or her own opinion, that's his business or her business. But just the fact that he comes to me, and it's also a show of respect, that you're competent in the area, I ask you, and then opinion building is something else. And I think that's what we should, at least we strive to in that direction, that we're there, we're expert for the whole population.
As the border is quite near to Germany, has it been like NGOs from Germany also.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see the cultural differences if you move 5 kilometers across the border. The way you discuss is different north of the border than south of the border.
In what way?
Well, in the Swiss case, you know, we got a lot of direct democracy. So you can vote on anything. If you want to have 5 bicycle ways more and so on, and if you want to raise your own taxes or lower your taxes, you can vote on that. So that means that in order to be heard, it's much easier to be heard. You collect enough signatures and you will have a vote on whatever. We want to abolish the army. If you find enough votes, you can vote on them 3 months' time, so to say. Okay, in Germany you can't. And that means in order simply to be heard, you have to be somewhat louder. And so that means, and authorities are not as well respected as in Switzerland. So you don't trust competence sometimes. But as soon as you be there in Germany and talk to the citizen again, they show the same behavior, polite, nice, interested in your work. So it's also the difference between normal people and the political levels, because they have to show and demonstrate their interests and as a stakeholder. But after a while, you get used to that.
Yeah.
So I guess if you talk in Sweden or in Finland, you will also notice some slight cultural differences, I presume. Or are you that similar?
I don't know, maybe.
I think we could come up with
All right, okay.
differences.
Okay.
I just want to add something. We're talking about being proud. Of course, I'm really, really proud that we at the SSM were able to finalize our review and the result we came up with, the work done towards this goal. I'm really, really proud about that. It's been a challenge just to grab this complex issue and being the first one and then having a partner coming up behind and up close and just coming a bit further in front of us. It's been really exciting to take part in that process, and I'm really, really proud of the work that all the reviewers have done and the capability we had to take all the information from the industry together with all the research information and the experts review issues that we handed out and got back and put it all together to a final decision. I think that's something to be really proud of.
Yeah. As this is a kind of pioneer project, has it been difficult to find qualified researchers to do this specific kind of research? You mentioned it a little bit.
Yes, I mentioned that we're, 2 organizations trying to get the same researcher. We've had to go outside our borders to sometimes to find researchers, but I think we've been quite successful though to find people. But sometimes it's been difficult, but if you keep looking, hopefully you'll find someone who can do the task for you.
So do you use the same researchers?
Well,
Yes.
same reviewers.
Yeah.
Sometimes also, we used to have also a little bit more about kind of joint research that, SKI and then SSM was funding together with the STUK, for example, related to some, I think, creep and corrosion aspects. We used to do joint research some years ago, but then more recently we have used the same reviewers because, well, in a way, it's a problem to have an independent reviewer. We are not able to find many of them in Finland because most of them are working with Posiva, which has the big research and development budget, which is what they are supposed to have, I think, because of course the licensee, Posiva is now licensee, they are responsible for the safety. So also I think they should have the best resources to develop the safety case. And then it's regulators' problem or challenge to try to find good enough or good experts that we can use. And we have also gone abroad. We have quite often used the same as SSM, sometimes different, but many of them are same. And I think it's also, in a way, it would be maybe excellent position that we would have totally separate experts, so it would be kind of duplicate review. But that's also kind of challenge that if they don't have enough work, it might be that they want to work for some of the implementers, because we have quite strict requirements that, for example, because SKP and Posiva are cooperating, we don't allow our experts to be working neither of them, or even to NACRA because they are cooperating. Also the French system is a little bit out of the scope, because all the disposal implementers are cooperating and they are sharing information. So we have restrictions of who you can work. So it's also a possibility to provide enough work to the experts that they stay involved, because there is so much information that if we would be changing the expert every year or every couple of years, it would just be, there's so much to study about the history and what has happened and how the knowledge has evolved. So it takes quite a long time to get accustomed to the whole safety system and the site properties and how Posiva, for example, is modeling things and augmenting the safety. So
we've been talking to each other to try to make sure that we don't ask the same question to the same expert. If we want to look in the same area, at least we can have different questions to the same one, so they don't get paid twice. Question.
And you got this kind of state-owned technical organization.
Well, yeah, VTT, but then VTT is working on private markets, and they are also doing quite a lot of research for Posiva. Posiva used to be their biggest customer, I think. So we can, well, then we have developed some rules that we can use certain people. We are using also VTT, but just certain people that are not working for Posiva. And that's also been challenged to find from VTT experts that would be that haven't been working for Posiva. So many cases we go to the university, so we go abroad.
Oh, okay. And how about you evaluate the research that companies comes up with, like Posiva, Nagra, and SKB? Is it hard to find research to do those reviews, or is it the same researchers?
Well, we have twofold. We have a lot of technical expertise in-house, so all the model calculations are done in-house, and so you're able to ask the right questions because you have done it yourself independently. And what we have simply collaboration with the university over long periods of time. We also finance PhD works, simply to actually have young people in the field, and they will not show as they end up in the nuclear business most of the time. However, maybe 10, 15 years later, they know a bit about the problems. You can call them back. There are people around. And that helps. We also do, there are 2 rock laboratories in Switzerland, one in granite and in the Alps, one in clay in western Switzerland. And we finance research with a lot of universities. And that gives competence and a steady inflow of knowledge. And the Monterrey lab is also used by industry, but there you have, if you're a member of that lab, you have access to all scientific information that is also produced by industry. So you get a nice overview what the reasons are, what the findings are, and also I think what we have also system, since we're trying to, also industry has that, they want to publish their results in refereed journals, in peer-reviewed journals, and that's also important. That's, you don't say if you have, Nagra finances a group at the Paul Scherrer Institute, a large research lab in Switzerland, and they are doing nice work for the last 25 years, building up some thermodynamics database for sorption and so on. So they're really good in the business. They produced a lot of peer-reviewed paper. That alone, if you check what the industry uses, kind of research they produce, what the level is, the excellence of level, that also helps you in the review. You don't have to question everything if you know that lab has produced excellent results for the last 25 years. They're good at it. And so that's also something, I think you have to simply to observe what the quality of the research output is.
So we have kind of, agree totally what Felix is saying. We have also the expertise and competencies that we can make the overall safety evaluation with STUK expertise, and we can evaluate the performance. We are doing our own modeling to kind of repeat parts that what Posiva has been doing and do something else, so that we have in-house. But then I think it's a selection that we are also evaluating the quality of work that Posiva is doing, what their subcontractors or the researchers are doing, and certain areas that if we think that there is uncertainties that we are not totally convinced, then we can go deeper, and then we try to find outside experts to go in deep if we don't have in-house expertise in that, to support in that deep review. But we don't go deep in every place because the scientific basis it's broad. There is so many issues that we are not able to, and I think it's not the purpose of the regulatory review to go to check everything. That's the purpose, that's the responsibility of the applicant to make that, and we are evaluating that they are doing the work. And in some cases, we also check in detail about the basis and the scientific soundness of the work. But we don't have to duplicate or replicate everything that they are doing.
Do you want to add something?
Yes, I can add that we as well have a good in-house expertise, able to do the review in depth, but also more putting things together. One of the strategic thoughts about building up the competence in the early 90s was to be able to use researchers also in the review process. So build a competence level within the society, the Swedish society, to be able to draw on that into the review. So that was one of the strategic thoughts.
Yeah.
So yes, to your question, yes, we've been using partly the same researchers or the same experts, both as researchers and as reviewers.
Okay. Yeah. Are there any questions here from the audience in this specific topic? There. Miles Goldstick.
Miles Goldstick, the Swedish Environmental Movement's Nuclear Waste Secretariat, which is a coalition of Friends of the Earth Sweden and the National Anti-Nuclear... Hello, can you hear me? Yep. Yeah, do I start over? Miles Goldstick from the Swedish Environmental Movement's Nuclear Waste Secretariat. We're a coalition of Friends of the Earth Sweden and the National Anti-Nuclear Group, and we cooperate with a number of local environmental groups in Sweden. I have a question, and I'd like to make a comment first. This is a 10-year celebration, and I'd like to say thank goodness for SSM. If it wasn't for SSM, it would be the law of the jungle. That being said, that according to our view, there's much room for improvement, and we're very strong critics of how SSM has acted, and we'd like to see big changes. We frame the issue differently. We look at the issue differently. We don't talk about disposal. We have different views entirely that aren't being presented here in the formal program. But now I'll go to my question. If the Finnish and Swiss guests could comment on how you deal with the problem of the long-term hazard, talking of hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, and particularly the aspect of monitoring and retrievability. In Sweden, as you may be aware, the industry wants to basically close the facility and leave it alone, and they have no plans for monitoring or retrievability. And this long-term hazard would be very interesting. I'd be very interested to know how you deal with that.
Okay, I can start. So, well, of course, that's the key basic challenge that we have on disposal and spent fuel, that it's hazardous for extremely long periods. That also gives the reason that we need to find some kind of safe solution. We need to find a safe solution what to do with the spent fuel. So that's in a way, that's also why we need to find something, and that's the challenge that we need to address or solve. So, well, I think just a couple of aspects on that. Yes, spent fuel can pose a hazard for really long periods, for hundreds and thousands of years. But also you need to take into account that the radioactivity level goes down quite fast, and after the few thousands of years, the fission products are gone, and then the hazard is quite much different, and the threat that it poses to the environment and people have decreased a lot. And if we take that into account, so that the kind of activity and the hazardness is decreasing, of course, when you look in the future, the uncertainties are increasing, but based on kind of the overall estimate, well, I believe that you can be quite confident that you don't get that kind of doses into the surface that would make a big significance for human health, for example. So, and well, not to go into too much detail, but I think two things are that, of course, the uncertainties are increasing when you go far in the future, but also the activity is going down, well, during the first thousands of years. About the monitoring aspect, if I understood the comment or question correctly, well, I think the basic assumption coming also from the international requirements is that the disposal has to be passively safe. And also, how I think about that is that, well, how could we say that we can rely for a monitoring, that there is a society to monitor for the disposal for, well, we could say that, okay, maybe for several hundreds of years, there would be somebody to take care of. But can we say that for thousands of years, or 2,000 or 10,000 years, that there is somebody to monitor about something, what happens with the disposal? If we would be able to say that, well, yes, the society is here, well, we could have it in the storage in the surface. Why bother to do anything with that? Because there would be the society to keep up the infrastructure and monitor about the safety. But because I think, well, I'm not able to say that there will be a society. That's why, for example, the Finnish policy is clearly stated in the law that we need to find a safe disposal site and go with the disposal, which would be passively safe and not relying on a active maintenance and monitoring by the public, if I understood the question correctly.
Well, in the Swiss case, we had at the mid-90s, government actually collected an expert group with, from NGOs and technical experts on how to deal with spent fuel, totally generally. And they discussed all the options, how to store that or to dispose that, and they came up with a solution. But because, as Jussi Heinonen said, these wastes are active for a long, long time, you have to have a geological repository, what they say for society. And that's now in the Swiss law. We'll have this, I mentioned it, this pilot facility. A small part of the inventory is in a part of the repository with separate access, with instruments so that you can follow the development of that. And the law doesn't say for how long you're going to monitor. It's clear that you have to seal off the repository at a certain point in time, because you can't guarantee that there is a society around actually can take care of that responsibly. But we leave it to a future generation, say, okay, now we know enough, we can close it off. And it will be sealed off, and no human interaction is necessary. Actually, it's the basic of a geological repository, that you don't need human interaction. It will be not sound scientifically to actually do that, because you have no guarantee that the society is around. On top of that, we asked a critic of nuclear energy to write the report for us as the regulatory, and they say, okay, if you store this waste on ground, what are the problems you run into? We asked him, and he also said, in the long run, you need a geological repository. It's the only safe solution, because if you have a look at human history, how unstable societies are in the long run. I mean, I think the only organization I know that lasted longer than 2,000 years is the Catholic Church. But that's, they're not very good at guarding the nuclear waste. So, but all other...
You don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what's in the vault of the Vatican, right. No, but I mean, you can't assume stability from society. That's why you go into the only known system that is stable for 1 million years, and that's geology. Retrievability is also in the Swiss law. I said that too. They have to demonstrate that they can retrieve those wastes from the repository before they store it. That will be in the license. They have to demonstrate that's in the law, despite the fact that all involved parties the implementer or the regulator or politics actually wants to dispose the waste, not to retrieve it. But again, that's something that if society wishes to have this possibility, it has to be demonstrated that they can do it. And in the Swiss law, it is only up to a certain point when you're going to seal off the repository, then the retrievability is also gone. In the law, it says it's a easy retrievability because the ramps and the shafts are still open. You can still go down there. Once you have filled it up and sealed it off, nevertheless, you still could go down to the waste. You simply have to build up a new tunnel. You can always retrieve it if you really want it. But in the Swiss law, it's stipulated that while the repository is still being operated, that if you observe something or if society wants to have the uranium or the plutonium back, you can retrieve it. So that's the situation in Switzerland.
Ansi, do you want to add something? No,
Not really. We have the same view on this.
Okay. Any other questions?
Okay. No. Okay. I'm Gustav Lövnjärn, retired from SSM and now a consultant in small time. Yes, this is a question for Sweden and Finland. I noticed, the impression is that it's going faster in Finland.
Ursäkta, kan du hålla mikrofonen lite närmare?
Okay, it's going faster in Finland than compared to Sweden. And I would like to have some kind of explanation why. I mean, we have heard some differences. We had heard about the licensing process, and we heard about the TSO. And my feeling is that it is higher on the political agenda in Sweden than in compared to Finland, if that influences in some way. Okay, that's the question. Can you?
Well, I can start up since Jussi was explaining a lot about the Finnish process. In Sweden, we have this parallel process. I was just addressing it shortly in my presentation, where the more environmental issues are handled within the environmental code and the land environmental court. And it's a process of its own, and it has its own pace. In Finland, you don't have really the same way. You don't have a court hearing, and that's so. I think that is part of it, and we didn't have a decision in principle in Sweden as well. So we've been going all the way forward with the review of the applications, and now it's time for the government to make a decision on the license being granted or not. So I think since we had to deal more with environmental issues than I guess that our STUK friends has, it's part of the answer. It's taking us longer time.
So it's a big difference between Finland and Sweden in this way.
There are some differences. I don't know how. I have been thinking about this also. What are the differences and what are the similarities? And of course, the concept is the same. And what we have discussed with SSM and compared our safety evaluation, I think the main findings and the main comments, they are quite the same. So the conclusions from the regulatory side in the end is the same. I think that, well, I like really much the Finnish licensing system, so this might be a little bit coming from that. But I think in disposal, the stepwise system works quite well. That in the first, there is the principal discussion that should we go for disposal, or is there some other alternatives that we could use? Well, I think also that discussion, at least in the earlier phase of the Swedish review, at least at that time I heard that you had quite a lot of discussion on what different alternatives you would have. And also then you had the discussion about the two different sites. In our case, that was discussed before year 2000. So then the project has concentrated on single site and single concept. So I think that has been helpful in maybe for the construction license, that we can only focus on safety aspects of the construction. And then another difference in a way, I think, and coming back to the kind of political debate or how interested they are, but I think in a way it helps, because I think the disposal is, well, it helps that the government is going to be involved, so the councils of ministers is going to make the decision also for the operations. And because I think the disposal and being pioneer means that there is still uncertainties, there is still things that POSIVA and SKP needs to be doing before they are ready for operation. Not everything is ready right now. So in our case, it was not that challenging to say to the Council of Ministers that we think it's safe, there is still these things that they need to be doing. They could approve that, I think, also because they know that they will be involved in the latest step. Compared to Sweden, where the government is in one step making quite big decision on almost everything, and it might be a little bit more complicated to make the decision also. Then the environmental court thing is different. We don't have that kind of court system. And then the environmental aspect as part of environmental impact assessment, they are done before the decision principle. And then that report has to be updated for the next steps. But that's also difference that kind of debate we had quite in early days. And then for the political support, for some reasons, which I don't know all the things, the Finnish politicians have somehow figured out quite early that we have a waste issue and something needs to be done with that. And then when POSIVA was for decision principle, in 2000 it was ratified in Parliament. I think the votes were something like 150 for that and 3 against from the total 200 members of the Parliament. So there was a strong support for the disposal. And they have continued to support that if it's safe, there is no political changes of political attitude in this case, at least not yet. Hopefully there will not be. So.
I can add one thing. That there could be the difference in culture between Finnish and Swedish people, that we in Sweden tend to discuss more and longer before we come to a statement or a solution. Could be a difference.
Yeah. So do it a bit faster.
Jacob, you're sitting with your laptop there. Are there any questions from, no questions from people looking at the web? There you have one more question, Linda. Okay.
Bengt Hedberg from SSM. Thank you for the presentations. I have a question for Jussi. You indicated that you had some struggle internally when coming to a conclusion on the application, quite much related to scientific issues. I'm just curious about lessons learned and if you have, in that process, identified potential improvements to the regulatory framework so that it would facilitate a corresponding situation. Thank you.
I don't know if we have that specific lessons what we would do. Well, basically we had some different opinions also, which I think are quite normal also in the regulator about some aspects, how, for example, in our case, how to develop the scenarios for the future, how systematic you can be, different views about that. Then we had quite a lot of discussion about internally, for example, and using also outside expert, what is the international state-of-the-art level, what we can require, what's realistic, and also what's safety relevant. We all tried to discuss quite a lot about the safety relevance and about uncertainties and do we really need to require that. And in the end, we came in quite good agreement inside. Through the discussions on that, we had longer discussions and came to an agreement that all in STUK were satisfied on the result. Some aspect maybe we could do a little bit more formally. We have kind of documented that internally in the review memos, but maybe not everything is seen if we could go back on the kind of discussion. But no, after that we have developed further our safety regulation, taking some of the aspects that were raised during the review, and we now updated our safety regulations based on the experiences. So on that we took some of those aspects into account. So that, but otherwise I can't give you any better answer on that.
Okay, we have time for one more question before the coffee break.
Britta Kamp here from Milkas. It is EU directive that says that you can't build new nuclear plants if you're not if you not know how to do with the waste. Was it therefore that you had to take the decision fast before Sweden take?
You mean to build new nuclear plants in Finland?
In Finland, yeah.
Yes, they have to build new plants.
Well, no, it doesn't. It didn't have any relation to each other on that case. No, I'm not certain about the EU directive which you are referring and how precisely it requires that we can have a discussion on that. But our safety review and government decision on positive application wasn't anywhere related, for example, to Fennovoima's construction license application for the new nuclear power plant. And actually the situation is such, if you have been following, that because of our national system, that we have quite similar but a little bit different, that all the nuclear power plant owners, waste producers, are by themselves responsible for the waste management. TVO and Fortum, which are the operators of the Olkiluoto and Loviisa nuclear power plant, they have agreed to cooperate in the disposal, and they have established Posiva to take care of that. They had long negotiations with Fennovoima had negotiations with them, but they didn't come to an agreement that Fennovoima could use the Olkiluoto as disposal site for their future possible spent fuel. So the situation was such that then the government required that if you are not able to come to an agreement on disposal in Olkiluoto, you need to start your own site selection process for own disposal facility. And Fennovoima has started that. So this is the situation currently, that they have submitted the environmental impact assessment program and identified a few sites that they would start the site characterization. So the process is on the way, but then on further on about what government would require them in the construction license phase or in the possible operating license phase related to waste management, I can't say, because we are evaluating safety and not involved in all of those discussions, but I think government has been fairly strict on requiring that Fennovoima at least needs to have plans. They need to have plans how to move on, and Fennovoima has started the program. One aspect also to think is how realistically how far we can require that the nuclear companies have, for example, disposal facility existing when they start the operation of nuclear power plant, since you need storage and cooling time, and in Fennovoima's plans they would start the disposal in 2090, so more than 70 years from now. So there is also quite a long time before they need to have the disposal in operation. So there are different aspects that need to be evaluated.
Thank you, Jussi. So you may end up with a new review for the nuclear plant in Pejoki also.
Yes, but maybe, yeah, after a few decades, maybe something happened.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for coffee, and we see here klockan 11 så börjar det igen och då handlar det om säkerhetskulturen inom kärnenergiområdet och inom sjukvården. Tack.